The blood was still warm when Commander Curve TH stepped over the corpse of Admiral Nexrel and into the command center of Umbral's Edge. His scaled hands trembled not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of what he was about to do. Round him, the bridge crew of the Hegemony's most feared dreadnought lay scattered like broken dolls, their luminescent blood painting the obsidian floors in abstract patterns of death. The human had done this. One human. Status report, Curveth hissed to the surviving tactical officer, whose carapace bore fresh scorch marks from whatever hellish weapon the human had wielded. The siege fleet maintains formation, Commander. 73 vessels holding position around Kepler Station, but the officer's mandibles clicked nervously. The human escaped. He took the Wraith's Gambit, Curveth as for eyes narrowed to slits. The Wraith's Gambit, a ghost ship that had been drifting dead in space for 3 cycles. Its human crew long since suffocated when life support failed. Intelligence reported it as a derelict, useful only for scrap. They'd been wrong before about human ingenuity, but never this catastrophically wrong. On the main display, Kepler Station hung like a wounded beast against the star field. Its defensive platforms were smoking ruins, its orbital defense grid reduced to glowing debris. 60,000 human civilians huddled inside its failing shields, awaiting the inevitable bombardment that would reduce them to atoms. The Hegemony's blockade had been perfect until 20 minutes ago. Sir, the communications officer's voice cracked with strain. We're receiving a transmission from the derelict. Display it. The hologram that materialized was a nightmare-given form. The human stood amid the corpse-strewn bridge of his stolen vessel. But he wasn't some desperate survivor. His uniform was pristine despite the carnage around him. His weathered face bore the kind of scars that spoke of battles won through methods civilized species preferred not to contemplate. Most unsettling of all were his eyes, pale blue and utterly, inhumanly calm. "I am Captain Marcus Valdris of the Terran Colonial Navy," the human said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I'm assuming temporary command of this vessel. I have a message for whoever's in charge of this siege." Corveth activated the return channel. "I am Commander Corveth of the 3rd Hegemony Fleet. You are commanding a dead ship, human. Surrender now and your death will be swift." The human smile was a razor across his face. "Dead ship, Commander, you clearly don't understand human naval tradition. A ship isn't dead until her captain says she is, and I'm very much alive." Behind Valdris, the bridge of the Wraith's Gambit was a charnel house. 23 Hegemony boarding Marines lay twisted in positions that defied anatomy. Their exoskeletons cracked open like discarded shells. The human had boarded their own boarding craft, turned their assault into his infiltration, and somehow crossed from their ship to his through the vacuum of space. The tactical implications were staggering. Your ship has no life support, no power, no weapons. Corveth snarled. "You cannot fight 73 vessels with a corpse, can I?" Valdris reached down and hefted something off-screen. The severed head of a Hegemony admiral, its compound eyes still twitching. "I've already killed 2 of your flag officers with nothing but a combat knife and hard vacuum. Your boarding party discovered that human Marines don't need air to fight. We just need something worth killing." The transmission flickered as power fluctuated aboard the ghost ship. But Valdris remained steady, unmoved by the technical failures around him. "Here's my offer, Commander. You have exactly 9 minutes to break off the siege and retreat beyond the outer system. 9 minutes, or I demonstrate why humans earned the nickname Deathworlders during the First Contact Wars." Curveth's translator struggled with the human's next words, rendering them in the stilted cadence of machine speech, but the meaning was clear enough. 9 minutes, Zeno. Then I show you what a ghost ship can do when her captain refuses to die." The transmission cut, leaving the bridge of Umbral's Edge in stunned silence. In the void beyond, the Wraith's Gambit drifted like a tomb, dark except for the occasional flicker of emergency lighting. But aboard that tomb, something that should have been dead was very much alive and very, very angry. 8 minutes and 37 seconds. Captain Marcus Valdris sealed the breach in the Wraith's Gambit's hull with a piece of decking, plating, and his own belt. Then began the delicate process of jury-rigging life support from the corpses around him. The Hegemony Marines had been carrying portable atmosphere generator standard equipment for boarding actions. Their mistake had been assuming humans needed to breathe to kill. The bridge around him was a testament to that error. Bodies lay stacked where he'd used them for cover, their ichor congealing in the zero atmosphere. The ship's original crew, his people, had died at their posts 3 years ago. when a hegemony ambush severed their supply lines. Now their mummified remains sat at their stations like loyal sentinels, waiting for orders that would finally come. "Sorry for the wait, people," Valdres muttered as he activated the emergency beacon he'd torn from a dead Marine's armor. "Command's here now." The Wraith's Gambit had been Admiral Helena Voss's flagship during the Kepler campaign, a Ravager class heavy cruiser designed for one purpose, killing things efficiently. Her weapons were cold, her engines dead, her armor breached in a dozen places, but her bones were human-forged titanium, and her captain was still breathing. 8 minutes, 12 seconds. The first probe came from Umbral's Edge, a sensor pulse, meant to map the ghost ship's interior. Valdres felt it wash over him like a physical thing, cataloging the corpses, the damage, the apparent hopelessness of his situation. Let them look. Let them see a dead ship commanded by a madman. They couldn't see what mattered, the thermal charges he'd been placing throughout the vessel's superstructure. Couldn't detect the quantum mines he'd harvested from the hegemony boarding craft and repositioned with surgical precision. Most importantly, they couldn't comprehend the tactical doctrine that had made humanity the most feared species in known space. When civilized species went to war, they did so with rules, honor, carefully calculated exchanges of force. When humans went to war, they became something else entirely. 7 minutes, 48 seconds. Umbral's Edge moved first, as Valdres had known it would. The massive dreadnought's engines flared to life, carrying it closer to the derelict for what the hegemony clearly intended to be a coup de grace. Standard doctrine neutralized the threat. Before it could act, rational, predictable, suicidal, Valdres activated the Wraith's Gambit's emergency maneuvering thrusters, the only systems that still functioned reliably. The ghost ship lurched forward like a hunting beast awakening, her dead hull groaning under the sudden acceleration, not toward Umbral's Edge, but toward the siege formation's weakest point, the supply convoy hanging in the formation's rear. "Target the logistics vessels." He spoke to his dead crew as if they could hear him. "Cut the head off a snake, it grows back. Cut off its ability to feed, and it starves." The hegemony formation reacted with textbook precision, their heavy cruisers wheeling to intercept while Umbral's Edge came about for a killing shot. But they were thinking like a naval force engaging another naval force. Valdres was thinking like a virus infecting a host. 6 minutes, 31 seconds. The first hegemony destroyer, Crimson Talon, moved to block his approach to the supply ships. Her captain probably expected the ghost ship to attempt evasive maneuvers, to preserve what little combat capability it might have retained. Instead, Valdres aimed directly for the destroyer's forward section and activated the collision alarm. Crimson Talon's captain realized the human's intent with seconds to spare. The destroyer's engine screamed as she tried to break away, but momentum and physics conspired against her. The Wraith's Gambit struck her amidships at 17,000 kilometers per hour, the impact tearing both vessels apart in a burst of superheated plasma and vaporized metal. But in the moment before impact, Valdres had activated every quantum mine he positioned throughout his ship's hull. The explosion that followed wasn't nuclear, it was something far worse. Quantum mines didn't just destroy matter, they destabilized the fundamental forces holding atoms together. The detonation created a brief, artificial black hole that consumed both ships before collapsing into exotic radiation. The shockwave hammered the nearest supply vessel, Provision Bearer, cracking her hull and sending her tumbling end over end into the formation's midst. But that wasn't the real damage. The real damage was the realization rippling through the hegemony fleet. The human hadn't been trying to survive. He'd been trying to die in the most destructive way possible. 5 minutes, 57 seconds. In the expanding cloud of wreckage where the starships had annihilated each other, something moved. Not debris movement with purpose, with direction. Emergency pods, 17 of them, scattered by the explosion, but still under power, still under human control. Valdres had survived by doing what no sane captain would attempt, ejecting in the final seconds before impact, using the explosion itself to mask his escape pod's signatures and propel them deeper into the enemy formation. Now he was no longer commanding one dead ship, he was commanding 17 guided missiles, each carrying a very much alive human marine and enough explosives to gut a heavy cruiser. The siege of Kepler Station was about to become something else entirely. 5 minutes, 23 seconds. Commander Curveth watched the tactical display with growing horror as 17 human signatures scattered through his formation like seeds of destruction. Each pod was too small for his heavy weapons to target effectively, too fast for intercept fighters to catch, and moving with a coordination that suggested these weren't desperate survivors. They were components of a larger weapon system, sir. His tactical officer's voice cracked. The humans are using our own supply ships as cover. They're maneuvering through the formation using our vessels to block sensor locks. Then move the formation, get clear firing solutions. We can't, sir. If we break formation to engage the pods, we leave gaps in the siege perimeter. The station's remaining defense platforms could. The officer's words were cut off by a brilliant flash on the display. Sustenance Prime, a massive supply dreadnought carrying 3 months of provisions for the entire fleet, vanished in a sphere of nuclear fire. Where she had been, only expanding plasma remained. How? Curveth for eyes stared at the impossible sight. One pod couldn't carry enough ordnance to, sir. The communications officer's mandibles chattered with panic. We're receiving transmissions from the human pods. They're coordinating. The main display flickered, then filled with 17 human faces, each one broadcasting from a different escape pod scattered throughout the formation. But these weren't the faces of desperate survivors. These were the faces of predators who had found themselves in a target-rich environment. This is Sergeant Kane Rivera, 3rd Colonial Marines, said the human in Pod 7, his scarred face split by a feral grin. I've got a beautiful view of your command carrier from here. Zeno, thanks for the ride. Staff Sergeant Elena Kozlov reporting. Came another voice from Pod 12, currently attached to the hull of what your people call a logistics coordinator. Funny thing about human demolitions, we learned to make every gram count when we were fighting wars on worlds where every resource had to be shipped from the next star system. Curveth's tactical display updated in real time as his sensor operators tracked the pods. They weren't random, they were positioned with surgical precision throughout the formation, each one attached to a critical vessel, supply ships, command vessels, the mobile repair platforms that kept the siege fleet operational. Captain Marcus Valdres appeared on the central channel, his transmission coming from Pod 1. Behind him, through the transparent aluminum of his escape pod's canopy, the bulk of Umbral's edge loomed like a mountain of weaponized metal. For minutes, 38 seconds, Commander, Valdres said conversationally, I thought you might want an update on our tactical situation. You're outnumbered 73-17. Corvus snarled. Your people are in escape pods with no weapons, no support, no weapons? Rivera's laughter cut across the channel. Commander, you really don't understand human military doctrine. We don't have weapons. We are weapons. The first demonstration came from Sergeant Lew Harrison in Pod 14. His transmission showed him manually overriding his pod safety systems, turning its fusion plant into an improvised nuclear device. The pod detached from the communications array it had been mimicking debris against and accelerated toward the nearest heavy cruiser. For Kepler Station, Harrison said calmly, then cut his transmission. The cruiser Bone Render had 3 seconds to respond. Her point defense systems came online, filling space with coherent energy beams designed to intercept missiles and fighter craft. But Harrison's pod was too small, too fast, and piloted by someone who had already accepted death. The impact looked insignificant from a distance, a tiny flash against the cruiser's massive hull. But Harrison had struck at exactly the right spot, the junction between the ship's primary reactor and her weapons array. The fusion plant's detonation chain reacted with the cruiser's own power systems, and Bone Render tore herself apart from the inside out. For minutes, 12 seconds. You're insane, Corveth breathed, staring at the expanding debris field where one of his heavy cruisers had been moments before. Your own people are dying. My people died the day you started this siege, Valdres replied, his voice carrying the cold finality of absolute conviction. We're just choosing how to spend their deaths. The question is, how many of your people are you willing to spend trying to stop us? The answer came in the form of Umbral's Edge's main guns cycling to full power. The Dreadnought's primary armament could crack planets. It would make short work of escape pods, even if it meant accepting casualties from friendly fire. But as the massive vessel's weapons swiveled toward the nearest cluster of human pods, Valdres made his next move. Kozlov, you're up. Roger that, Captain. Initiating broken arrow protocol. Staff Sergeant Elena Kozlov had positioned her pod against the hull of Strategic Harvest, the fleet's primary ammunition ship. 3 million tons of plasma charges, quantum warheads, and exotic matter munitions, enough firepower to level a continent. She'd spent the last 4 minutes carefully placing shaped charges at structural weak points, turning the entire vessel into the largest bomb in human space. "This is for Admiral Voss and the crew of the Wraith's Gambit," she said. Then triggered the charges. Strategic Harvest didn't explode, she disintegrated. The detonation was visible. From 3-star systems away, an artificial sun that briefly outshone Kepler's primary. The shockwave hammered the hegemony formation, cracking hulls, overloading shields, and sending lighter vessels tumbling out of formation. When the glare faded, 17 hegemony vessels had been reduced to scrap. The survivors found themselves scattered, their formation broken, their supply lines severed. 3 minutes, 47 seconds remained. In the chaos, Captain Marcus Valdres smiled. The hegemony had fallen for humanity's oldest trick. They'd assumed humans would fight to preserve their own lives. They'd assumed wrong. 3 minutes, 21 seconds. The tactical situation had transformed from a siege to a slaughter, but Commander Curvith was far from defeated. As the senior surviving officer of what remained of the 3rd Hegemony Fleet, he possessed something the humans clearly hadn't anticipated: the willingness to sacrifice anything, including civilian lives, to maintain strategic objectives. "Signal all vessels," he commanded, his 4 eyes fixed on the tactical display where human pods continued their deadly dance. Through his scattered formation, "Implement Scorched Claw Protocol immediately." His tactical officer's carapace paled to a sickly gray. "Sir, that will target the civilian station as well as the human pods. The collateral damage is acceptable." Curvith's mandibles clicked with cold determination. "The humans want to play extinction games. We'll show them what extinction looks like." The remaining 56 vessels of the Hegemony Fleet immediately shifted their targeting priorities. Instead of trying to track the elusive human pods, they aimed their weapons at Kepler Station itself. 60,000 human civilians suddenly became shields to kill them, and the human pods would have nothing left to protect. Captain Marcus Valdres watched the enemy formation realign from his position near Umbral's Edge's hull and felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd seen this tactic before, on Proxima 7, when the Hegemony cornered the Colonial Fleet. They glassed 3 million civilians to deny humanity a strategic victory. "All pods, this is command," he transmitted on the encrypted channel. "Enemy is targeting the station. We're out of time." "Sir," came Sergeant Rivers' voice, strained but determined. "We still have 13 pods operational. That's not enough to stop 56 ships before they can fire." "No," Valdres agreed, studying the tactical display that his pods limited. "Sensors provided, but it's enough to do something else." The Umbral's Edge loomed beside him, her massive hull scarred by the shockwave from Strategic Harvest destruction, but still intact, still functional, still the most powerful vessel in the enemy formation. An idea began to form, not a plan, because plans required hope for survival, but something more like controlled devastation. "New mission parameters," he announced. "We're not stopping them from firing on the station. We're making them fire on each other." 2 minutes, 58 seconds. The first phase required sacrifice. Sergeant Chen Nakamura in Pod 8 positioned himself between Umbral's Edge and the nearest cluster of Hegemony vessels, then began broadcasting a false distress signal that mimicked the damaged Hegemony shuttle. In the chaos following Strategic Harvest destruction, the ruse might by precious seconds. It worked better than expected. Talon's Revenge, a Hegemony heavy cruiser, actually slowed to assist what she believed was a friendly vessel. Nakamura used those seconds to attach his pod to her hull and override her navigation systems with a virus the Colonial Intelligence Division had developed specifically for Hegemony computer networks. Ghost protocol uploaded, Nakamura reported. As his pod systems began to fail from the virus's feedback, "She's yours now, Captain." Talon's Revenge suddenly pivoted 90 degrees and opened fire on her own formation. Her plasma cannons carved through the shields of 2 nearby destroyers before her crew could regain control. But the damage was done. Confusion rippled through the Hegemony ranks as they tried to determine if the attack was intentional or some kind of human sabotage. 2 minutes, 34 seconds. Valdres used the confusion to position his pod against Umbral's Edge's primary sensor array. The Dreadnought's crew was so focused on tracking the remaining human pods that they missed the presence of the one that mattered most. Working with the speed of long practice, he began splicing into the ship's external communication grid. The Hegemony used quantum encrypted channels for fleet coordination, but they'd made one crucial error. they'd assume no human could physically access their communication network. They've been wrong about a lot of things regarding human capabilities. This is going to hurt, he muttered, then jammed his pod's entire power core into the alien communication system. The feedback was immediate, and agonizing quantum encryption wasn't designed for biological brains, and forcing the connection felt like having his neurons flayed with molecular wire. But for 17 seconds, Marcus Valdres became a living component of the Hegemony Fleet's command network. 17 seconds to rewrite their targeting solutions. 17 seconds to turn their own coordination protocols against them. 17 seconds to make 56 enemy warships point their weapons at each other. Instead of at Kepler Station, when he severed the connection, blood was streaming from his eyes, ears, and nose. The quantum feedback had probably taken years off his life, assuming he lived long enough for that to matter. But on the tactical display, every Hegemony vessel was now targeting what their computers insisted were high-priority human military assets. The fact that those assets were actually other Hegemony ships was a detail their automated systems would take precious seconds to resolve. 2 minutes, 7 seconds. All remaining pods, Valdres croaked, his voice barely functional after the neural trauma. Execute Hellfire Protocol. Make every shot count. The final phase was brutally simple. The 11 surviving human pods, scattered throughout the formation, simultaneously detonated their remaining ordnance not to destroy enemy ships, but to create sensor ghosts, false signatures that would further confuse the Hegemony targeting systems. In the chaos that followed, 56 Hegemony warships opened fire on what they believed were human targets. They were half right. The devastating barrage that followed lasted 37 seconds and reduced the third Hegemony fleet to scrap metal and expanding plasma clouds. Ships that had served the Hegemony for decades turned their weapons on their sister vessels, guided by corrupted data that identified friendlies as enemies and enemies as priority targets. Umbral's Edge managed to destroy 6 vessels before her. Crew realized what was happening and attempted emergency shutdown procedures. But by then, the remaining ships were firing on her. Convinced she had been compromised by human sabotage, Commander Curvith's last words, transmitted as his flagship's hull cracked under the combined fire of his own fleet, were a curse in the ancient Hegemony tongue that roughly translated to, "Clever little monsters." 1 minute, 42 seconds remained when the shooting stopped out in the silence that followed. Captain Marcus Valdres floated in his damaged pod, amid the wreckage of what had been the most powerful siege fleet in Hegemony space. His neural pathways were burned, his body was failing, and he could taste blood in every breath. But Kepler Station shields were still holding, and 60,000 human civilians were still alive. The ghost ship's captain had kept his promise. 1 minute, 37 seconds. The silence didn't last. From the edge of the Kepler system, sensors detected the impossible, a second Hegemony fleet dropping out of hyperspace. Not the scattered survivors of Curvith's formation, but a fresh armada of 87 vessels led by something that registered on scopes as a mobile battle fortress, a planet killer called Dominion's Wrath. Captain Marcus Valdres watched the new contacts resolve on his pod's failing display and felt something break inside his chest. Not his ribs, those had been cracked since the quantum feedback, but something deeper. The realization that everything they'd sacrificed, every life spent in those 17 pods, might not be enough, sir, came a crackling transmission from Staff Sergeant Torres in Pod 3, one of only 4 pods still operational. "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" "I see it." Valdres's voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute determination. "New fleet, 87 vessels. We've got 93 seconds to make them wish they'd stayed home." The lead ship of the new formation was broadcasting on standard Hegemony frequencies. "This is Fleet Admiral Vextar of the 1st Hegemony Armada. The siege of Kepler Station will proceed as planned. All resistance will be annihilated." Valdres smiled, tasting blood. "Torres, Brennan, Okafor sound. Off. Pod 3 operational, sir. Minimal ordnance remaining. Pod 11 functional. Captain, I've got 1 Hellfire torpedo left. Pod 16 reporting, engines critical. But I can still maneuver." For pods against 87 warships, the mathematics were clear, simple, and completely irrelevant. Humans had never been particularly good at mathematics when lives were on the line. 1 minute, 15 seconds. Dominion's Wrath was a kilometer-long nightmare of weaponized architecture, bristling with enough firepower to sterilize continents. Her escort fleet spread around her in a formation that spoke of centuries of tactical refinement, each vessel positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire that could track and destroy anything smaller than a cruiser. But they were thinking like a conventional fleet engaging conventional targets. They weren't prepared for what remained of humanity's most unconventional weapon, the will to turn death itself into a tactical advantage. New mission parameters, Valdres announced. We're not trying to stop them, we're trying to redirect them. Behind the incoming armada, Kepler station's remaining defense platforms were coming online damaged, but functional. Their crews working frantically to restore weapons that hadn't been fired in 3 years. Not enough firepower to stop a fleet, but potentially enough to exploit a weakness if someone could create one. 58 seconds. The first exchange of fire came from an unexpected source. Dominion's Wrath launched a spread of Planet Cracker missiles toward Kepler station, weapons designed to burrow into a world's crust and ignite the mantle. But Staff Sergeant Brennan in Pod 11 intercepted the first missile with a maneuver that defied both physics and sanity. His pod, traveling at maximum velocity, struck the Planet Cracker head-on. The collision should have simply vaporized both objects, but Brennan had rigged his pod's fusion plant to detonate at the moment of impact. The resulting explosion created a brief, artificial star that not only destroyed the Planet Cracker, but generated an electromagnetic pulse that disrupted the guidance systems of the remaining missiles. 7 planet killers tumbled out of control, their targeting corrupted. 3 struck ships in the hegemony formation, friendly fire on an apocalyptic scale. The heavy cruiser Apex Predator vanished in a burst of plasma that briefly outshone Kepler's sun. The destroyer Crimson Harvest simply ceased to exist. Her atoms redistributed across several cubic kilometers of space. 40-9 seconds. Fleet Admiral Vexstar's response was immediate and vicious. Every ship in his formation opened fire simultaneously, not at the remaining human pods, but at Kepler station itself. If the humans wanted to play mutual annihilation, the hegemony would oblige them and ensure that humanity's civilians paid the price. 800 plasma cannons, 300 particle beam arrays, and 60 gravity pulse weapons focused their combined fury on the station's failing shields. The barrier that had protected 60,000 lives flickered under the assault, its generators screaming as they diverted power from life support to maintain even minimal protection. But the barrage also revealed something Admiral Vexstar hadn't anticipated. The human defenders weren't just fighting for the station. They were fighting for something much more dangerous. 30-7 seconds. Torres. Okafor, you see the pattern. Valdres's voice was barely audible over the static of his failing pod, but his meaning was clear. The hegemony formation had committed to a sustained bombardment, which meant their vessels were locked into predictable firing positions. I see it, sir, Torres replied from Pod 3, their focus on the station, not watching their flanks or their rear, added Okafor from Pod 16. The final gambit required precision that bordered on the supernatural, using the expanding debris from the first fleet as cover. The 3 surviving pods maneuvered through the new formation's blind spots, not to attack the ships directly, they lacked the firepower for that, but to target something more vulnerable. The hegemony fleet's coordination depended on quantum communication networks that linked every vessel to Dominion's Wrath's command center. Disrupt that network, and 87 ships would become 87 individual targets trying to coordinate through backup systems. 20-8 seconds. Torres reached the communication array first, his pod latching onto the massive relay station that served as the fleet's nerve center. Like Valdres before him, he interfaced directly with alien technology, accepting the neural feedback that would probably kill him in exchange for 17 seconds of access to the enemy's command structure. But Torres had learned from his captain's example. Instead of trying to rewrite targeting data process that required delicate precision, he simply introduced chaos, random numbers, false coordinates, corrupted priority codes. The quantum communication network didn't shut down, it began transmitting. Gibberish. 19 seconds. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Ships throughout the hegemony formation suddenly received contradictory orders. Fire on grid coordinates that didn't exist. Defend assets that weren't there. Retreat to rally points in empty space. Some vessels continued their bombardment of Kepler station. Others turned their weapons on ships they now identified as hostile contacts. Okafor used the confusion to reach Dominion's Wrath's primary reactor array, his pods remaining explosives. shaped into a surgical charge designed to breach the battle fortress's containment system. The detonation was relatively small, barely visible against the massive ship's hull, but it breached the magnetic bottles containing antimatter fuel for the fortress's primary weapons. 14 seconds. Dominion's wrath died the way gods die not, with a whimper, but with a roar that shattered the fundamental structure of local space-time. The antimatter breach propagated through her hull in microseconds, converting matter to energy with perfect efficiency. The explosion was visible from neighboring star systems, a brief second sun that painted the cosmos in the colors of absolute destruction. The shockwave hammered the surviving hegemony vessels, cracking hulls and overloading systems. Ships that had survived the coordination breakdown found themselves tumbling through space, their crews struggling to maintain basic life support. 7 seconds. In the silence that followed, Captain Marcus Valdres floated in his dying pod and watched Kepler's station shield stabilize. The bombardment had stopped. The siege was broken. 60,000 civilians would live to see another day. His mission. Timer reached zero as rescue ships from the station began accelerating toward the debris field, searching for survivors among the wreckage of 2 fleets. The ghost ship's captain closed his eyes and allowed himself one moment of satisfaction before the cold of space claimed him. He kept his promise. Captain Marcus Valdres should have been dead. The rescue team from Kepler's station found his pod drifting in the debris field 4 to 7 minutes after the final explosion, its life support systems offline, its occupants showing no vital signs. Standard protocol would have classified him as Kier and moved on to the next pod except for the fact that his body temperature was 5 degrees above normal, and his neural activity was spiking off their instruments. Dr. Miriam Cross had seen a lot of things during the siege, but she'd never seen someone survive direct quantum interface feedback. The neural pathways should have been burned out, the brain tissue cooked from the inside by exotic radiation. Instead, the man they pulled from the pod was unconscious but stable, his mind apparently adapting to damage that would have killed anyone else. Get him to the medical bay, she ordered the rescue team. Full neurological isolation protocol. I want to know what the quantum exposure did to him. What it had done was remarkable and terrifying in equal measure. When Valdres regained consciousness 18 hours later, his first words were coordinates not for any location in the Kepler system, but for a hegemony staging area 3 parsecs away. Information he couldn't possibly possess unless his connection to their communication network had left more than just damage. Captain, Dr. Cross said carefully, studying the readings from the neural monitors surrounding his medical pod. What do you remember about the quantum interface? Valdres turned his head slowly, his pale blue eyes now showing flecks of color that hadn't been there before, an iridescent quality that seemed to shift in the light. I remember everything, he said quietly. There's an ours. The implications hit her like a physical blow. You're saying you retain access to hegemony data, not access. Integration. He sat up despite the restraints, moving with the fluid precision of someone whose nervous system had been fundamentally altered. The quantum interface didn't just connect me to their network, it rewrote parts of my brain to process their information architecture. I can think like them now, see their tactical patterns, anticipate their responses. Dr. Cross checked her instruments twice before trusting what they told her. His brain activity was unlike anything in medical literature. Human cognitive patterns, overlaid with something decidedly alien, 2 different types of consciousness existing in the same neural space. Sir, she said, reaching for the communication panel, I need to contact Colonial Command immediately. This changes everything. No. Valdres's voice carried an authority that made her hand freeze. Over the controls. It changes nothing. The Kepler system is secure, but there are 17 other human colonies under siege. The hegemony won't make the same mistakes twice. They'll adapt, send larger fleets, better commanders. He stood, the medical restraints parting like paper in his hands. Unless we get there first. Dr. Cross stared at the impossible figure before her, part human, part something else, bearing knowledge that could reshape the war. Get where first? You're talking about 18 human colonies scattered across 40 parsecs of space. No single ship could. Who said anything about a single ship? Valdres walked to the medical bay's observation window, gazing out at the wreckage floating beyond Kepler station. Among the debris were dozens of hegemony vessels damaged but salvageable. Their crews dead, but their weapons intact. Doctor, how many people survived the siege? Approximately 58,000 civilians. plus the station's military complement of. How many of those military personnel have ship handling experience? Dr. Cross felt a chill as she began to understand. Maybe 300 with command-level training, another 1,000 with technical specializations. But Captain, you can't be suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything. Valdres turned from the window, and she saw something inhuman flicker behind. His eyes the cold calculation of a predator that had learned to think like its prey. I'm stating operational parameters. The hegemony has siege fleets moving on 17 colonies. Standard doctrine says each colony fights alone, holds out as long as possible. Hopes for relief that won't come. He began moving toward the door, his stride carrying the confidence of someone who no longer doubted the outcome of battles before they began. But what if they didn't fight alone? What if someone who understands hegemony tactics hit their staging areas before they could deploy? With what fleet? Those hulks out there are barely spaceworthy, and even if we could crew them, we don't need a fleet, Doctor. We need a plague. The door sealed behind him, leaving Dr. Cross alone with readings that suggested the human brain could adapt to quantum integration in ways no one had imagined. Outside the window, the wreckage of 2 fleets drifted like seeds waiting to sprout into something new, something that would carry the war to the enemy's home systems. 12 hours later, Captain Marcus Valdres stood in what had been the Umbral's Edge's command center, now hastily repressurized and fitted with human life support systems. Around him, 300 volunteers worked to splice human technology into alien systems, creating hybrid vessels that could function with skeleton crews. Status report. He called to Commander Sarachan, the station's former defensive coordinator, who had volunteered to serve as his executive officer. We've got 17 vessels approaching minimal operational status, she replied, consulting a datapad that displayed information in both human and hegemony script. Another side effect of Valdres's quantum integration had been the ability to read alien languages as easily as his own. Weapons systems are functional, engines at 60% of rated capacity, life support stable for crews of 30 to 50 per ship, and volunteers, more than we can use. Sir, word spread about what you're planning. Every survivor wants a chance to hit back. Valdres nodded, studying the tactical display that showed not just the Kepler system, but the positions of hegemony fleets. Throughout human space information pulled from the quantum network. During those 17 seconds of connection, the aliens were moving with devastating efficiency, their siege fleets converging on human colonies with mathematical precision. But mathematics worked both ways. Signal all vessels, he commanded. We deploy in 6 hours. Mission parameters are as follows. We don't fight fair, we don't take prisoners, and we don't stop until every siege fleet in human space is debris, the hybrid fleet that departed Kepler. Stationed 6 hours later would have been unrecognizable to anyone familiar with conventional naval doctrine. 17 vessels of mixed human and hegemony technology, their hulls patched with whatever materials could be found, their crews drawn from civilians who had never served aboard anything larger than a transport shuttle, but they were commanded by someone who could think like the enemy, fight like a human, and turn death itself into a weapon. The ghost ship's captain had died in the vacuum between Wraith's Gambit and Umbral's Edge. What emerged from Kepler Station was something else entirely, a hybrid consciousness that understood both human determination and alien tactics, leading a fleet of impossible vessels crewed by people who had nothing left to lose. The hegemony had created their own worst nightmare, a human who could outthink them, outfight them, and turn their own weapons against them. The siege of human space was about to become something very different. The hybrid fleet's first target was the hegemony staging area at Voss Prime, where Admiral Kethmer was assembling a siege force of 93 vessels for the assault on New Geneva colony. Intelligence gathered during Valdres's quantum interface indicated the fleet would deploy in 36 hours, more than enough time for a conventional response. Valdres arrived in 18 hours. The Dominion's Edge's flagship, jury-rigged from the remains of Umbral's Edge and powered by human determination, dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Voss system like a ghost materializing from nightmare. Behind her came 16 vessels that shouldn't have existed, hegemony cruisers running on human engineering, alien destroyers crewed by colonists who had learned to fight in the void between stars. Admiral Kethmer, Valdres transmitted on standard hegemony frequencies, his voice carrying the hybrid accent that marked him as something between species. I am Captain Marcus Valdres of the Terran Colonial Navy. I'm here to discuss the terms of your surrender. The response came in the form of plasma cannon fire from 6 different directions, the standard hegemony response to human communication attempts. But Valdres was no longer thinking like a human commander trying to outfight superior numbers. He was thinking like a hegemony admiral who happened to understand human psychology. The first phase lasted for minutes and resulted in the complete destruction of Admiral Kethmer's forward screening elements. 12 hegemony vessels simply vanished, not in dramatic explosions, but in brief flickers of light that marked the efficient application of overwhelming firepower to critical structural points. The demonstration is concluded, Valdres announced as debris from the screening force scattered across the system. You now have 90 vessels remaining. I have 17. Basic mathematics suggests you maintain a significant advantage. Would you like to test that hypothesis? What followed wasn't a battle in any conventional sense. It was a systematic dissection of hegemony naval doctrine by someone who understood both its strengths and its fatal weaknesses. Valdres's hybrid fleet moved through Admiral Kethmer's formation like a virus, targeting command vessels first, then communication relays, then the supply ships that kept the siege fleet operational. The human crews fought with the desperate efficiency of people defending their homes. The alien ships responded to their commands with the precision of technology, designed for efficiency above all else, and Valdres coordinated it all with the tactical prescience of someone who could predict enemy responses before they were made by the time the shooting stopped. 87 hegemony vessels had been reduced to scrap metal. The surviving 3 had surrendered after watching their entire fleet consumed by an enemy that shouldn't have existed. Signal Colonial Command, Valdres ordered as his crews began salvaging what they could from the wreckage. Voss Prime is secure, proceeding to Rigel Station. The pattern repeated itself across 17 star systems over the course of 6 weeks. The hybrid fleet would arrive at a hegemony staging area, offer surrender terms that were inevitably refused, then systematically dismantle forces that outnumbered them by factors of 3, 4, sometimes 5 to 1. At Rigel Station, they captured a siege fleet of 112 vessels with the loss of only 2 ships. From their own formation, at Tau Ceti, they prevented the glassing of New Shanghai by arriving 30 minutes before the bombardment was scheduled to begin. At Wolf 359, they turned a hegemony planet killer into expanding plasma before it could deploy its ultimate weapons. Each victory brought new recruit survivors from the colonies they'd saved, volunteers from the ships they captured, humans who had learned that the war could be won if they were willing to become something more than human to do it. By the time the hybrid fleet reached the hegemony home system of Zephyria Prime, it consisted of 43 vessels and nearly 10,000 crew members who had been forged by war into something the galaxy had never seen before. The final battle lasted 9 hours and ended with the complete surrender of the hegemony core. Fleet 300 vessels that had never known defeat, commanded by admirals who had conquered 17 different species, brought to their knees by a force they couldn't understand or predict. This is Captain Marcus Valdres of the Terran Colonial Navy. He announced to the Hegemony High Command as their Fortress World shields failed and their orbital defenses went dark. I'm here to discuss the terms of your surrender. This time, they listened. The treaty signed aboard the Dominion's Edge 3 days later established humanity as the dominant military power in known space, ended the siege of all human colonies, and created a buffer zone around human territory that would remain inviolate for the next 1,000 years. But perhaps more importantly, it established a precedent that would reshape interstellar relations for generations to come. The understanding that humans, when pushed to their limits, didn't just fight back, they evolved. 6 months after the siege of Kepler Station ended, Captain Marcus Valdres stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt station, watching construction crews work to expand the facilities that would serve as the headquarters for humanity's new deep space fleet. The hybrid ships moved through the construction zone like living things, their crews human and alien working together, turning the lessons learned in war toward the purposes of peace. Dr. Cross joined him at the observation window, her medical scanner discreetly checking the neural patterns that had stabilized into something entirely new. Over the past half year, any regrets? She asked quietly. Valdres considered the question as he watched a hegemony heavy cruiser, now flying human colors, dock with the station. Aboard that ship were 300 former enemies who had chosen to serve under human command, rather than return to a hegemony that no longer existed in any meaningful sense. I died when I took command of the Wraith's Gambit, he said finally. What came back was something else, something that needed to exist for humanity to survive. And now we make sure it never needs to exist again, outside the window. The hybrid fleet continued its eternal patrol. Guardian ships crewed by humans who had learned to think like their enemies, armed with weapons that had been turned from instruments of conquest into tools of protection. The siege of human space was over. The age of human space had begun, and somewhere in the quantum foam between stars, the ghost of the Wraith's Gambit sailed on, her crew finally at peace. Their sacrifice transformed into something that would endure long after the last star burned cold. The universe had learned a lesson that would echo through the ages. When you threaten everything a human holds dear, you don't create a victim. You create a force of nature. And forces of nature don't negotiate. They simply reshape the world to suit their needs.